What's up, friends? Welcome to the 2.6 podcast with Luke and Adrian. On this podcast, we focus on Web3, business, and achieving your personal potential. Today's episode is a Web3 project spotlight, where we'll go deep into some of the details of one of our favorite projects, Chikn, which sits on the Avalanche blockchain. As with all of our episodes, none of what you hear today is to be considered financial advice. This is purely for entertainment purposes. With that all said, let's talk Chikn. What is going on, friends? Welcome to the 2.6 podcast with Luke and Adrian. Before we kind of get into the details of Chikn, I thought it'd be good to just really get a high level of what is Web3 gaming. So some of you may be listening to or watching this podcast and just wondering, what is a Web3 game? How is that different from other things that I play either on my phone, on a console, on my PC? One of the big things that I would say is different about Web3 gaming compared to traditional gaming is that you have the ability to truly own your assets. So there's other games that you might play where you can buy an asset. So let's say, for example, in Fortnite, you wanted to buy a skin that you want to use. Or if you're playing Minecraft and you want to buy an upgrade to that with Minecoins or Roblox with Robux, you can definitely buy those kinds of things. And that exists all over the place with mobile gaming, that type of thing as well. I think one of the main things that's different about Web3 gaming is that it's an asset that you not only own, but you can transfer it if you want to. So let's say that, you were kind of done playing the game. You didn't really want to play anymore at the end of it and you wanted to sell it. Well, with traditional gaming like we have today, typically you can't do that. With a Web3 game, there is the possibility that you could sell the asset that you've been using to play the game. And in certain other cases, you have the ability to sell things that are produced by the asset. So we're going to talk about some of the things that the different NFTs or functions of Chikn have that produce assets. So that's probably the main thing that's different. There's a whole lot of other things that we won't really dig into too much that kind of make it different, the blockchain, the technology, that kind of thing. But for the sake of today, just kind of think of it as the way you own it is a little bit different than you might be used to in other gaming if you're new to Web3 gaming. All right, so with that, I want to turn it over to you, Adrian, to talk a little bit more about Chikn more specifically. What is Chikn? Why do people care about it?
So I think one of the big things about Chikn and basically what it is it's an on-chain game on the Avalanche network. So right now the main objective is to care for your farm, comprised with your chickens, roosters, and your farmland. And the goal is to essentially grow them in size or by kg, which in the chicken terms is killer gains. But truly it's like kilograms, right? So you're just making everything bigger. So the bigger the chicken, the bigger the rooster, the bigger the farmland, generally the better your farm is going to produce those items. So with in terms of the long term or the gaming of Chikn, it's more of a long term game. Now you can speed up the game more as you go along by which we'll go into a little bit further with burning tokens to maybe skip that time. But for right now, say you don't do that, you can basically just keep improving or growing your chickens, your roosters, and expanding your farmland, and just waiting until that time expires so you can go on to the next upgrade. So to go over some of the basic tokenomics, there's three components. You have a chicken, which the chicken basically is in charge of your egg production. You can grow the chicken with a token called feed. So you feed your chickens and you basically get feed by going to an online platform where you can actually buy that feed or that feed token. And you put that feed token and feed it to your chicken, and your chicken basically grows into size. So I guess one of the main questions we generally get is, why would I want to make my chicken any bigger? And the main reason is because chicken are the only thing that will lay egg. And egg is going to be comprised of it's basically the most important component or the most important token in the game. And within those chickens, you're going to notice that there's a lot of different chickens with different colors, some funny traits with helmets, with feet, you name it. It goes a long way across the board with traits. And some of those traits don't necessarily have much meaning right now, but they will be later on, and we'll go into that further as we break down each little section. The next item that we have, or next character, we have Rooster. So Rooster is in charge of creating Fert. Fert is the other token that is used to expand your gameplay. So you want to basically feed one egg per day to produce that Fert, and you want to grow your rooster in kg size so that it produces more Fert. And of course, again, why do you want to create more? Why do you want to basically make your rooster bigger? There's several different factors. Right now, there's a lot of in-depth things that we're going to go into why we want to make them bigger. But for right now, what we do know is that they're going to be basically creating more Fert. Fert is going to be a valuable token with your farmland. And also, it's going to have to do something with the cockfighting or whatnot, the gameplay itself down the road, which we're going to go more into. So they will also have traits along with the chickens. They both have traits. And each one of those traits interacts something differently with the gameplay and also within your farmland. So going more into farmland, you're going to have what we call worm production. So worm production, kind of the same thing. You're going to have ways of producing worm that you're going to put into your farmland, but you can also use it within the ecosystem as itself. So for right now, we'll keep it kind of basic. We're not going to go too far into what the worm will do, but the whole thing that I want you to understand is that all these tokens are interlaced with each other, and it makes a great ecosystem, and it makes everything jive and what we call tokenomics. So the main thing with the farmland is you want to grow your farmland by flipping tiles, and you will flip those tiles by burning egg. And by burning that egg, you're going to flip tiles with different rarities, different items on there, which we'll go further into a little bit later. And the other aspect that you get into when you're going into your farmlands is you can create kind of a multiplier, which will go more. I know it sounds a little crazy, but we'll go further into it when we improve the fertility with the Fert token that your rooster produces. So not going too far into it. I know this is basically just the beginning, but we just want to kind of skim a little bit off the top, give you a little bit of an intro before we really jump dive, dive deep, Luke, dive deep. So Luke, why don't you take it over, go into the basic tokenomics of the coins, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
All right. So thanks so much, Adrian. So as Adrian mentioned, there are three main NFTs or main tokens that produce assets in the game. Those are the chickens, the roosters, and the farmland. Now we're going to talk more about what they actually produce. And Adrian gave you a bit of an intro into what those things are. So the first one we'll start with is feed. And so feed is, as Adrian mentioned, the way that you grow your chicken. And there used to be a way that we could produce feed ourselves. There was a way to do that with the farmland. That's now transitioned over to producing worm, which I'll talk about in a bit. But feed is really going to be the way that you grow your chickens. It's also something you can do, as Adrian mentioned, if you want to kind of skip ahead a little bit. So it takes a while after a chicken is grown or a rooster is grown before they're allowed to grow again. And so one way that you can bypass that is by spending some feed in order to skip the growth time, and you can grow one more time. And you can only use that once per cycle. We'll talk about that more later on. But that's another thing that you can do with it. A third thing that you could do with feed is you can hold it because there's no more feed being made. So all the feed that is ever going to exist has already been made. And so people are going to want to grow their chickens. And so you might hold it, or you might put it into what's called a liquidity pool, which I'll talk about here in a bit, or Adrian will, going through a way to earn more worm by putting that in there. All right. So how do you get feed? Right now, the only way to do that is to actually buy it. And there's different sites you can do that with. Most folks use one called Trader Joe, and you can trade other tokens for the feed that you want. All right, let's get into our next one, and that is egg. So as Adrian mentioned, egg is the main token that powers the overall game, and that is something that is only produced by chickens. You can use it for a number of different things. One of the big ones that you can use it for is to grow your rooster. So your rooster, every time it reaches a new level, you're able to spend a certain amount of egg to grow that rooster a little bit more. it's also a requirement for you to be able to produce Fert. So if your rooster's hungry, then he doesn't have any Fert left to squirt, and he stops producing any Fert. He won't die, so he doesn't need to be fed every day to live. But in order to produce any Fert, you actually do need to feed him at least one per day in order for him to do that. So that's one of the big things that you do with it. Another thing that you can do, as Adrian mentioned with the farmland, is getting the tiles to be added to your farm and to grow the size of your farm. There's a number of different reasons you want your farm to be bigger. It allows you to earn more. There's some other things that we'll talk about in the future around foraging and things like that. But if you want the farm to be bigger, you can also do that by spending a certain number of egg on it. There's some fun things you can do with it as well. So if you want to name your chickens, name your roosters, name your farm, you can spend egg to do that. I personally am very happy to spend egg to name my roosters. All of my roosters and chickens and farms have names. Our friend Adrian does not like to name his birds. And so he runs more of a factory farm where he has a bunch of nameless birds. Mine all have names. Several of them have backstories. We'll talk about that more in the future. But that's another thing that you can do with your egg. So the last thing that you can do is, or that we'll talk about today that you can do is, of course, you can sell it. So you can sell it and trade it for other tokens. So let's say you need more Fert for something that you're doing. You can trade the egg for that. And then you can also, of course, put it in your liquidity pool, which will allow you to grow more worm. And really all of the tokens that I'm going to talk about, you have the ability to do that. And again, Adrian's going to talk more about what a liquidity pool is. All right. So how do you get egg? Well, you feed your chickens. So the more that you grow that chicken, the more it's going to produce for the rest of its life. And again, those chicken don't have to be fed. They just produce it. So even if you bought a chicken, forgot about it for a year, you would have a year's worth of egg just waiting for you when you come back. All right. So let's talk next about Fert. So what do you do with Fert? So one of the big things that you use it for is to make your farmland more fertile. So we talked a little bit about the fact that you can earn worm by putting a LP into your farmland. Well, one of the things that happens is you get a certain rate of return on what you put in there. So let's say you put X number of eggs into your farmland, and it'll earn, to start off with, 4% in returns on that egg. Well, if you spend some Fert on that farmland, it'll have the ability to have a higher rate of return. So it can go all the way from 4 up to 16%. So the more Fert you spend on that, the more profitable your farm can be in terms of the worm that it produces. So that's one of the big things that you can do with that. You also have the ability to, again, put it into the farm as LP, so you can get more worm from that. You can trade it. And there's lots of other things you can actually do when it comes to like foraging and some of the other parts of the game that we're not going to talk about right now. But those are kind of the main uses that you have for at least the simplest form of the game. All right, how do you get Fert? Just like with chicken, your bird produces it every day. So your roosters, in this case, produce Fert. And so for every kg that your rooster is, it produces 2 Fert per day, as long as it has gotten an egg for that day. So they start off at 6, and then they go up from there. So a brand new 1 kg rooster is going to produce 6 Fert, and then go all the way up from there. So my biggest rooster, who's named El Diablo, we'll look out for him when it comes to some of the future elements of the game. He's 120 kg, and he squirts 244 Fert per day. So they can go all the way up there. Mine is by no means the largest. I think there's about 150, 200 roosters bigger than mine, but there's some big ones out there. But the bigger they get, the more Fert they're going to produce every day. Adrian, how big is your biggest bird? Do you remember how many kg?
Dude, I haven't broken 100 kg yet. I'm slowly getting there. Factory farm doesn't like big birds. We like to be efficient.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about our different strategies in the future. He is, as his name might imply, a realtor, and so he's very much more on the farmland and the real estate side of the game. We'll talk about more.
That's right.
So, all right. So let's talk more about our last one, which is worm. And so the way that you produce worm, like we've talked about, you can put all of these other tokens, including worm, into a liquidity pool, put that into your farmland, and you can earn worm from that. So what do you do with worm? Well, that's going to be a topic for a future podcast. But at a high level, it can be used to produce new assets through something called foraging and crafting. There's also another element where you can use the worm to find other things within your farm. But we'll talk more about that in a future episode. But those are some of the big things that you can do with worm. So now that we've talked about the tokens, there is a concept called liquidity pool that I've been talking about a bit. Adrian, do you want to take the team
Yeah,
through just what that looks like and how that works?
yeah. Liquidity pools are kind of the cool part of the game. It gives you more of, I hate to even use like the finance side of it, but it truly helps. Without going too far into it, it truly helps the game play when you're exchanging tokens for one another. So, in a nutshell, what the liquidity pool does, if you look at it in terms of like, say, just like a savings account. So you're putting in some of these tokens, right? Remember, there's egg, there's fert, there's feed, and there's worm. So you can do any combination of those four tokens combined with AVAX, which is Avalanche. It's basically the Avalanche network's token, and you can combine, say, egg and Avalanche or AVAX. That's going to be your main token. So if you were to put that into your farmland, and depending on the size and the multiplier of your farmland, it will pay you, in a sense, interest. And that interest is going to be in the form of worms. So everything is going to be kind of producing worm. And that worm is going to be something that you're going to do whatever you want to do with it. You can sell it on the open market. You can go ahead and turn it in and put it back into your farmland to keep playing the game and expanding your ecosystem. But it is not, and that's why, of course, this is just education. But it's, in a sense, if it was like, say, a savings account, it's a lot different than a savings account because there is some risk involved with it. So that risk would be depending on the price, because these coins do fluctuate in price on the open market, just like any other exchange. So there is what we call impermanent loss. Impermanent loss, you're going to hear quite often with liquidity pools throughout Web3 or crypto. And that is going to be your risk. So the risk is basically when you have a value change in one of those four tokens, the egg, fert, feed, or worm, or even Avalanche or your AVAX. So not to go again too far into it, we're going to break this down more in detail, but it's going to be just kind of give you a brief little code of like how this ecosystem works and what you can do. The liquidity pool gives you more of a financial aspect of putting two coins together and producing another, which is kind of really cool when you start looking into it in a financial sense. But we're gonna go more into a lot of the advanced elements of Chikn and FarmLand. We're not going to cover it today, but we want to cover more like what you do with your worm and how you're going to put that into your farm, what you're going to do in terms of creating other little digital assets into foraging, crafting, and how that's going to come into play with the main game, which is cockfighting. So I hope that was not too confusing. But Luke, anything else you want to add to that?
I think a lot of really exciting things coming within the game. We've only scratched the surface today on kind of how the game works, but it can be a lot to process. And so we want to break this out into pieces so that folks can learn at a good pace for that. But really just to kind
Absolutely.
of recap some of the main things that we covered today. So if you remember nothing else from today, remember that chicken lay egg, rooster squirt fert, and farmland produces worm. And all of those pieces work together to help grow your farm, make it better, and open up some really cool possibilities within the game as we get ready for cockfighting and some of the other things that are going to happen within the game.
And I think
So
to
thank
catch
y'all.
up a little bit more on that,
Yeah.
Luke, is we're going to go more into the strategies of each one of those. And that's probably one of the biggest and the funnest thing to talk about with Chikn is the different strategies that people put into play and what angle are they using to get the advantage. So just wanted to add that to it.
All
We're
right. Well,
just gonna,
that's gonna go ahead and wrap us up for today. So Adrian, you want to tell us where they can find you on socials?
yeah, absolutely. You can find me at Realtor Adrian. That's going to be the main Twitter, and then Instagram, which is going to be at Realtor Adrian 505. Those are probably going to be the main two spots to find me, and see you there.
All right. And you can find me at Luke152 on Twitter. And if you find me on Threads, I don't post a whole lot on Threads, but it'll be Luke152.eth. But thank you all so much for listening. If you did enjoy today's session, please rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. We are going to be covering a whole lot more about Chikn, so stay tuned for more info there. We'll also link some things in the show notes if you want to kind of dig into the Chikn website. There's a whole lot more great information out there. But thanks so much for joining us today, and we will talk to you soon.
See you next time.